Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going on a journey through Deuteronomy. And to help us navigate this fascinating book, we have the expertise of Professor Jair Pintor from the Instituto Bíblico do Brasil. So picture this. The Israelites are camped out on the plains of Moab, right? They're a new generation, ready to cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land.
It's such a pivotal moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what makes Deuteronomy so interesting is that it's not just a list of rules. It's actually 3 powerful speeches by Moses, almost like his farewell address, packed with stories, warnings, blessings.
And you know, what's really fascinating is that we often call it Deuteronomy, which comes from the Greek meaning second law.
Ah, right.
But the Hebrew title is Devarim. That means words, emphasizing that these are the speeches of Moses. Professor Pintor points out that this is so crucial because this generation, they hadn't seen the miracles in Egypt firsthand. They needed to hear these words to really understand their history and their faith.
So it's like a crash course, a reminder of everything they needed to know before facing this huge challenge, conquering the Promised Land.
Exactly. Now, to understand the book, think of it as 3 distinct speeches.
Okay, so 3 speeches. A lifetime of lessons, right? What kind of topics are we talking about here?
Well, the first one, it spans from Deuteronomy 1.6 to 4.43. Moses starts by recounting their journey from Sinai.
Right, setting the stage.
But then he drops this intriguing detail. He mentions ancient giants.
Wait, hold on. Giants, you mean those legendary figures like in the epic tales?
Precisely. The Emmons, the Enoquins, Rephanes. These names would have sent shivers down their spines. It's actually connected to the story of the 12 spies. The people were terrified of these giants. That's why they delayed entering Canaan for 38 years.
Wow, I never made that connection. It really adds another layer to that story, doesn't it? I mean, facing giants. That's a bit more intimidating than just crossing a river.
Definitely. And this fear really underscores what Professor Pintor emphasizes, the sovereignty of God and his faithfulness.
Right, they're about to face these intimidating giants, so they needed that reassurance.
They needed that reminder that God delivered them from Egypt, and he would help them overcome these obstacles too.
So it's not just a history lesson. It's like a pep talk, a reminder that God is with them every step of the way.
Absolutely. But Deuteronomy isn't just about giants and conquests. It also delves into the intricacies of God's law. And this is where it goes beyond just the 10 Commandments. You encounter concepts like laws, statutes, and judgments.
Okay, now I've always been a bit confused by those 3. It sounds a bit overwhelming. What's the difference?
Okay, think of it like this. Laws are the core principles, the big picture stuff. Statutes are more like specific applications of those principles in their daily lives. And judgments, those are the precedents set when applying those laws in particular situations.
So it's like a legal system, right? From general principles to specific cases.
Exactly. And this shows that God's law wasn't meant to be some abstract idea. It was meant to permeate every aspect of their lives, even something as seemingly insignificant as mixing fabrics in their clothing.
Hold on. Mixed fabrics. What does that have to do with anything?
That's what I thought too. But Professor Pintor explains that even these small details played a role in shaping their identity as God's chosen people. It was about setting them apart, demonstrating their obedience in every aspect of life.
So even their clothes were a way of expressing their faith. It's fascinating how these details held such deep meaning.
It is, and this emphasis on God's law brings us to another powerful concept. The blessings and curses pronounced from Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal.
Right, that scene in Deuteronomy 27:28 always felt like a really dramatic moment.
Oh, it definitely was. It was a way to visually demonstrate the consequences of obedience and disobedience. And here's something Professor Pintor highlights that I found really interesting. The people responded amen to the curses, but not to the blessings.
Wow, that's odd, isn't it? It makes you wonder. Were they more afraid of the punishment than they were excited about the blessings?
It certainly makes you think.
It shows us that even though they were ancient people, they were still human with all our complexities and doubts.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes Deuteronomy so compelling. It's not just a history book. It's a story about real people grappling with their faith, their doubts, and their relationship with God.
Speaking of grappling with faith, what about those instructions for the future king? The ones in Deuteronomy 17.1:14-20.
Yes.
It always seemed a bit out of place to me, considering they didn't even have a king yet.
I know. That's what makes it so intriguing. It's as if Moses is anticipating the potential pitfalls of power, even before there's a king to wield it.
So it's not just a set of rules, it's a warning about the temptations that come with leadership.
Exactly. For example, he warns against accumulating too much wealth, horses, or wives. It's almost as if he's foreseeing how these things could lead a king astray.
Wow, that's incredible foresight. And it also speaks to the importance of humility and trusting in God, even when you're in a position of power.
Exactly. And this section also includes a prophecy about a future prophet like Moses.
Ah, the prophet who will come from among the Israelites and speak God's words.
Yes. And it's here that we start to see the connections to Jesus that Professor Pintor so often highlights.
It's amazing how even in this farewell address, there is a sense of hope and anticipation for what's to come.
Precisely. And that hope is strengthened by the themes running through Deuteronomy, God's sovereignty and faithfulness, reminding us that even when we can't see it, God is working.
So we've got giants, we've got laws, blessings, and curses, even glimpses into the future. It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, we have. There's so much more to uncover, including Moses' final song and the mystery of his burial.
That's for the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the importance of a centralized place of worship. Why was that so crucial for the Israelites, especially right before entering the Promised Land?
It's a great question. You see, before Canaan, they had the tabernacle, which was portable. But Deuteronomy sets the stage for something more permanent, a central place of worship. This foreshadows the eventual building of the temple in Jerusalem.
Ah, so it's not just about a physical location. It's about uniting the nation geographically and spiritually.
Exactly. And it emphasizes the importance of gathering as a community to worship, which is something that's still so relevant today, even if we don't have a physical temple.
It makes you think about how our own places of worship can cultivate that same sense of unity.
It does. And this leads us to another important theme that Professor Pintor highlights: the need for social justice and righteousness.
Okay.
Deuteronomy is filled with laws that protect the vulnerable, widows, orphans, foreigners. It also condemns dishonesty, oppressing the poor, taking advantage of those in need.
It's like a blueprint for a just and compassionate society, one built on ethical behavior and a genuine concern for others.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our faith should impact how we treat those around us, especially the most vulnerable.
And a powerful message, one that still resonates today. And it speaks to the timeless relevance of Deuteronomy.
Absolutely. It's more than just an ancient text. It's a living testament to God's love, his faithfulness, and his desire for us to live in a way that reflects his character.
Well, we'll pause there for now. But we'll be back soon to delve deeper into the insights Professor Pintor has gleaned from Deuteronomy in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. We're back, ready to dive even deeper into Deuteronomy with Professor Jair Pintor's work as our guide.
Last time we were talking about some of those very specific rules, like not mixing fabrics and clothing.
Yes.
It really got me thinking, is Deuteronomy really a second law, or is it something more? It's a question Professor Pintor tackles head-on. Deuteronomy isn't just a repeat of the laws from Mount Sinai. It's about presenting them from a fresh perspective.
Right.
Emphasizing God's sovereignty and his faithfulness to this new generation. Remember, they were about to enter the Promised Land, a whole new chapter. They really needed that reassurance of God's presence.
I see. So it's less about introducing brand new rules and more about applying them in a new context. Like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, here are the basics. Now this is how to live them out as you enter this exciting, but maybe a bit terrifying new phase.
Precisely. And that focus on God's sovereignty is so important here because, as Professor Pintor points out, they were going to face all sorts of new challenges in the Promised Land.
Oh, right.
New enemies, new temptations. Deuteronomy is like a pep talk. It reminds them of God's faithfulness in the past, and that's meant to fuel their faith for the future.
I like that. A pep talk for the people about to inherit the Promised Land.
Exactly.
But it's not just about motivation, right? It also gets into the nitty-gritty details of how they should live in this new land.
Right. It is. Deuteronomy is not just a pep talk. It's like a guidebook. It lays out how to live as God's chosen people. It really emphasizes the importance of worshiping God alone, following his laws, and establishing a just and righteous society.
Okay, so we have the what? God's sovereignty, faithfulness, choosing Israel, the law. What about the how? How does Deuteronomy actually get all this across?
That's where the brilliance of these speeches, these darvarim, comes in. Moses uses all sorts of literary techniques to really drive home the points. You see historical accounts, poetry, even songs.
Songs, you mean like actual music,
Yeah.
in the middle of all this law giving.
Yes. Deuteronomy 32 is actually a whole song. It's Moses' final song. and it's packed with powerful imagery and metaphors. It vividly portrays God's power and Israel's potential.
Wow. That's not your typical legal document. It sounds like Moses is trying to reach their hearts as much as their minds. It's like he's saying, this is not just a set of rules. This is about a relationship with God that should move you, inspire you.
That's exactly it. It's like he's pulling out all the stops to make sure his message really sinks in before he's gone. He doesn't just want them to hear it, he wants them to feel it in their souls.
So what kind of themes does this final song touch on?
It's an incredible mix of emotions and ideas. It reflects on God's faithfulness, Israel's potential for both amazing blessings and also tragic disobedience, and even hints at God's ultimate justice and mercy.
It sounds like a song you could spend a lifetime unpacking. And speaking of powerful moments, there's also Moses' death and burial, described in Deuteronomy 34. Professor Pintor pointed out a very specific detail there.
Ah, the fact that no one knows where he's buried.
Yes. That always seems strange to me. Do you think it's intentional? Like some sort of symbolic gesture?
Professor Pintor suggests that it might have been a deliberate choice to prevent the Israelites from turning his grave into a place of idol worship.
Ah, that makes sense. It's like a safeguard against straying from that core belief. One God, no idols, no matter how great the leader.
Exactly. The focus should be on God, not any human, not even a revered figure like Moses.
So we have these three speeches, this farewell song, a mysterious burial. Deuteronomy is clearly a complex and layered book. What's the main takeaway for us today, though?
Right.
We're not about to conquer any promised lands, at least not in the literal sense.
That's the question that Professor Pintor keeps coming back to. One key takeaway is remembering our own spiritual heritage. Just like those Israelites, we need to remember God's faithfulness in the past to strengthen our faith for today and for the future. It's about grounding ourselves in God's actions and history.
Like we need our own version of Deuteronomy, the remix, finding ways to make these ancient truths relevant to our lives today.
I love that. But it's not just about remembering. Deuteronomy challenges us to actually live out our faith, to put it into practice.
Right.
Just like the Israelites were called to create a just and righteous society, we're called to do the same in our own communities.
So it's not just an ancient document, it's a call to action. It's about taking those principles of justice, compassion, and righteousness and actually applying them to our own lives.
Precisely. Deuteronomy reminds us that faith isn't passive, it's active. It's about making choices that reflect God's character and values.
In every area of life.
Yes, exactly. Whether it's our families, our work, our communities, it all matters.
Okay, so we've talked about remembering God's faithfulness, living out our faith actively. What about some of the other big themes that Professor Pintor emphasizes, like the importance of having a centralized place of worship? That seems like a very specific detail.
It is, and Professor Pintor sees something deeper there. Remember, before they entered Canaan, they worshipped at the tabernacle, which was portable. But Deuteronomy lays the foundation for something more permanent, a central place for worship.
So it's foreshadowing the temple in Jerusalem.
Exactly. Deuteronomy 12 is very clear about this. It stresses how important it is to offer sacrifices and worship God at the place that he chooses. This wasn't just about convenience, it was about unifying the nation, bringing them together both geographically and spiritually.
It makes sense, having that central gathering place for a people who had been wandering for so long. But what does that mean for us today? We don't have a physical temple. Does it even apply?
That's a great question. While we may not have a physical temple, the principle of unity and shared worship is still important. It's about finding ways to connect with other believers, to come together as a community and celebrate our shared faith.
So finding those spaces, whether it's a church building, a home group, or even an online community, where we can experience that sense of belonging, that shared purpose.
Yeah.
Recognizing that faith isn't meant to be lived in isolation.
You got it. We need that connection with others, that support and encouragement to really grow in our faith. And this emphasis on community ties into another vital theme that Professor Pintor brings up, the need for social justice and righteousness. It's not enough to just gather together. We're called to act justly and compassionately towards others, especially towards those who are most vulnerable.
So it's about putting our faith into action, making a real difference in the world.
That's it. Deuteronomy is full of examples of this. Laws to protect widows and orphans, condemnation of dishonest practices and the oppression of the poor. It's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to flourish, where justice and compassion are part of the fabric of life.
It's a powerful vision, and still so relevant today.
Absolutely. And it challenges us to examine our own lives and our communities. Are we living up to this ideal? Are we really striving for a world where justice and righteousness prevail?
That's a great question to consider as we continue to explore Deuteronomy. But for now, we'll take a break. We'll be back for the final part, where we'll unpack Moses' powerful final words and see what other insights Professor Pintor has for us. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into Deuteronomy. It's been amazing to explore these themes with Professor Pintor's work guiding us. We've talked about giants, blessings, curses, even that mysterious empty grave. But I keep thinking about those 3 speeches of Moses. Is there a specific way they build on each other?
Professor Pintor definitely thinks so, and it makes the book even more powerful. That first speech, it's all about remembering. Moses is setting the stage, reminding the Israelites of God's faithfulness throughout their history, who he is, what he's done for them.
Like establishing that core identity, that feeling of being God's chosen people before they head into this whole new situation.
Exactly. And then that second speech gets practical. It lays out the law, showing them how to live as God's people in this new land. It's like a handbook for the promised land.
Okay, so first, the why, that foundation of who God is, and then the how, those practical instructions for living it out.
Exactly. Then comes the third speech. It's full of warnings and blessings. It's as if Moses is saying, look, here's the deal. Obey, and you'll experience incredible blessings. Disobey and face the consequences. The choice is yours.
It's a powerful call to action. More than just a list of rules, it's about understanding that potential of this covenant relationship.
Exactly. And throughout all 3 speeches, you see those recurring themes that Professor Pintor emphasizes. God's sovereignty, his faithfulness, the call to worship him alone, the need for social justice. It's all interconnected.
It really is amazing how relevant a text written thousands of years ago can still be. It's like Deuteronomy is speaking to us across time, offering this wisdom for living out our faith today, no matter what challenges we're facing.
One thing that really stands out to me that Professor Pintor highlights is that emphasis on choice. Throughout the book, the Israelites are constantly reminded they have a choice: obey God and experience blessings, or disobey and face consequences. It's a choice we all face every day, really.
It's that age-old struggle, isn't it? Will we follow God's will or go our own way? But even when Moses is outlining those potential consequences, he doesn't take away hope. He always brings it back to God's mercy.
Absolutely. It's that reminder that no matter how far we stray, God's love and forgiveness are always there. If we just turn back to him, it's really at the heart of the whole biblical story, isn't it? Even when we mess up, there's always a way back.
It's a message I think we all need to hear. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep going back to those final words from Moses, those blessings he pronounces over each tribe. They're so poetic, so full of hope for the future.
Professor Pintor points out that those blessings aren't just generic well wishes, They reflect each tribe's unique character, their calling. It highlights how diverse and rich God's people are.
It's like Moses is saying, you each have a special role to play in God's plan. Embrace it.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful message for us today, too. You and I, we each have unique gifts, unique callings. Deuteronomy reminds us to embrace those gifts, to step into our purpose. Trust that God will use us to accomplish his good plans in the world.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. It's been such an enriching journey exploring Deuteronomy through Professor Pintor's work.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked a desire in you to explore Deuteronomy for yourselves. There's so much to discover, so much to learn, and so much to inspire you. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.